Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Crypto Philanthropy, where we highlight the top giving news, stories, and power of crypto for good. Nick Mikhalevsky, Senior Sales Manager here at The Giving Block, and as always, joined by my colleague, Pietro Moran. Pietro, how's it going?
It's going great. Good to see you, Nick. I mean, what a week. Oh my gosh. Not any shortage of things to talk about, but extremely exuberant. I think crypto is having its moment, at least for this cycle, let's say, because we've had moments over the years that have all been very impactful and informative for us. But unbelievable. Bitcoin 100K. There's so much to talk about. And we have a special guest. I mean, Nick, run us through the run a show for today.
Yeah, so we're going to do a quick recap of just some news that's broken since we were last here. And for anybody who's watching this episode, this episode's going to come out next week. So if this episode drops and some major news has happened and you're not hearing it, a little bit of a staggered recording this week. But as far as some of the top news, obviously we saw Bitcoin break 100K. Today, ETH up over 4K. Some major appointments in the new administration, in the crypto markets. So there's a lot to talk about, but what we really wanted to get to today is a very special episode all around donor advised funds. And with that, want to bring in a very special guest, Phil Geiger, head of product marketing from Unchained, to join us today. Phil, thanks for joining the show.
Guys, I'm psyched to be here. It's always exciting to record an episode the day after we hit 100K. I know it's dipped a little bit, but maybe by the time this episode drops, we'll be at 125, 130K for Bitcoin.
Love it. So Phil, for folks who haven't heard of Unchained or maybe unfamiliar, what's kind of the quick pitch on you guys at Unchained?
Absolutely. So Unchained is a Bitcoin financial services company. We were founded in 2016. Our first product was released in 2017, which was Bitcoin collateralized loans. Now you can kind of think of Unchained as a one-stop shop for all of your Bitcoin financial services needs. And what's really interesting about the way that we do things is everything is built on top of collaborative custody multi-signature. So keys are distributed among different parties. Clients can hold 2 keys, Unchained can hold 1 key, clients have full control. Or you can distribute keys in where a client holds 1 key, Unchained holds 1 key, and another company holds another key. Anyways, everything we do is built on top of keys, and we have a full team here that helps guide you along the way to help you secure your Bitcoin. And then we are able to offer very cool financial services on top of that model, such as Bitcoin donor advised funds.
Yeah, fantastic. And DAFs have been one of the hottest topics. I mean, I think one of the coolest things about what we'll talk about today, it's a sort of like, bringing together these two really innovative groups into one, sort of synergy product here. We talked to a lot of nonprofits and a lot of donors, get really excited about the power of crypto philanthropy. It's the main sort of topic of the show. And as more nonprofits are getting into this space, quickly seeing donor advised funds as that other really hot kind of commodity, for lack of a better term, in the space. So maybe give us a little bit of a quick refresh on sort of this really unique product of a crypto DAF.
Well, this year, Unchained really started our philanthropic efforts, I would say. We kicked it off earlier in the year by helping University of Austin, Texas form the first university Bitcoin endowment, where they have $5 million in Bitcoin secured on chain in this collaborative custody model that I mentioned. And with our total assets on the platform now over $10 billion, it started making sense for us to look at different charitable products and services such as donor advised funds. So, donor advised funds were a really, really nice first foray as far as a philanthropic product for our existing clients. And it's really nice because it meshes well with the offerings that we have for nonprofit organizations. So we can help nonprofit organizations custody Bitcoin, trade Bitcoin, accept Bitcoin. And then now we have that product that marries, the Bitcoin custody with what the donors are doing. So just to recap for people who maybe aren't as familiar with donor advised funds, I like to think of donor advised funds as similar to an IRA, a 401k, or even an HSA, but with the caveat that all funds that are in a donor advised fund must make it to a 501c3. So you can donate money, Bitcoin, altcoins, stocks, real estate, into a donor advised fund. Within that fund, you can invest it into different things. In a Bitcoin DAF with Unchained, you can secure it on chain in Bitcoin. Donors get to control a key. And then you can watch the value of that Bitcoin grow over time, with the end result of sending either Bitcoin or dollars to nonprofit organizations. And we've really seen some great success so far. So this came out at Unchained in late September of 2024. We've already raised nearly $2 million in charitable donations. And with the value of Bitcoin ripping, that just continues to increase. So one of the most exciting things about it was during the kind of pre-launch phase, I was able to connect with a bunch of different nonprofit organizations that support Bitcoin, accept Bitcoin, and so on. And they all were able to participate in the launch. So we got some great quotes. They're on the website. We put them in front of our donors. And then the donors ideologically typically really like the organizations that are supporting Bitcoin in some way, furthering the Bitcoin mission, either that or accepting Bitcoin. So just 100%. A really nice marriage of a bunch of different wins here.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to, sorry to jump in here, Nick, but I was, just super captivated by something you said here, Phil, which I think a lot of folks who maybe are unfamiliar with DAFs, like one of the things maybe that we can touch on a bit more is like, when you think about the price of crypto having appreciated so significantly over the past decade, and you think about the deep pool of capital that some of these investors now have and are thinking about allocated towards, charitable causes, doing good with that capital, one of the things that comes to mind very directly, and folks maybe who don't know what a DAF does or is in great detail would probably benefit from hearing, like, it sounds to me at least that like it takes away the feeling of being rushed, especially when you're thinking about those larger contributions. Maybe you could touch on that a little bit, because as far as I understand it and I see it, it's like if I have $1 million that I want to put to work for good, but I'm also thematically aligned with crypto still, like maybe I don't want to make all those decisions in 1 year and think, okay, how do I distribute this money really quickly? Who's going to be the right recipient? It sounds like this is maybe a way to be a bit more thoughtful. Can you talk about that a bit more?
There are major tax advantages to donor advised funds. That's one thing that I didn't even touch on when I kind of introduced them. It's kind of maybe the number one selling point for DAFs over something like a private foundation or just giving directly to charity is that, like you mentioned, you get to really time when you get your tax write-off and then when a charity receives dollars or Bitcoin, right? So if you're, selling some altcoins that went up really a lot this year and you have a large kind of tax burden, instead of paying taxes on that, what you could do is donate a portion of your altcoins to a donor advised fund, get that tax write-off at the full fair market value. Then your trade or whatever, you're not paying the capital gains taxes on that necessarily. And of course, you want to consult with a tax advisor when you're going through all of this. But you wouldn't necessarily need to pay capital gains taxes on that sale. And then over time, in the future, you can drip out grants to charities. So you can grant, in your example, the full $1 million that same year, or you can hold that $1 million in Bitcoin and grant out, 10K at a time over, potentially indefinitely if Bitcoin continues to increase in value like we're seeing. So it's a really nice, effective way to, I like to think about it as holding Bitcoin on behalf of charities or causes that you really care about. And it's another way to do it in potentially even an easier way to get those causes introduced to Bitcoin without having to go through the whole process of orange pilling them, getting them to necessarily understand Bitcoin, accept it. You can just send them dollar grants from your Bitcoin DAF over the course of many years. And then once they realize, like, wow, this Bitcoin thing is really helping us, further our mission, that's when then they're kind of more curious about Bitcoin itself and they can start accepting it directly.
Yeah. And if you can share, I mean, it's interesting that you had a pilot group of nonprofits, at the launch of this. Curious to know, what maybe some anecdotes that you could share from those organizations. Don't have to necessarily name them, but, really curious to understand what the development teams and the advancement officers, at those institutions, their reactions were to this and how they're viewing this going forward. Sounds like a great tool.
Thank you. Yes, and I think we actually have a few Giving Block clients as well. So I know Ettore from Save the Children was very excited about it. He's a big advocate for y'all. And we have organizations like OpenSats, which helps fund Bitcoin and freedom projects. It's famously the one that Jack Dorsey donated to earlier in 2024. I think he gave them a $21 million grant. Other organizations such as Base 58, so this is the small Bitcoin engineering school here in Austin, they received the world's first Bitcoin grant from a donor advised fund. So they received the grant in Bitcoin. With traditional donor advised funds, while many of them can accept Bitcoin, although recently I've been hearing rumors that some of them have stopped accepting Bitcoin. When they do accept it, they immediately liquidate it for dollars. And then they might give you the option to gain exposure to Bitcoin within the DAF through, MicroStrategy or the ETFs or so on. But when you send grants to nonprofit organizations, they send in dollars. So that's kind of the big differentiating factor between the Bitcoin DAFs with Unchained versus the traditional DAFs. Is with the Bitcoin DAFs, Bitcoin goes in, lands, sits there on chain for as long as you'd like. You can in fact hold a key if you're a donor. You don't have control of the Bitcoin, but you get to participate in the security. And then over time, you get to either make those grants in dollars or in Bitcoin, according to if the charity or nonprofit org accepts Bitcoin.
Yeah, and it's interesting because from being kind of on the front lines there, talking to nonprofit organizations every day, I'm starting to get more of those questions around, well, do we necessarily have to liquidate? And of course, it's always in the context of Bitcoin, and can we hold? A lot of times we have a board member who has either initiated that conversation into looking at the acceptance of cryptocurrencies in general. I was on a call yesterday with an organization said, yeah, we have a board member that wants to donate some Bitcoin, but does not want it liquidated, wants it sort of preserved there as well. So, maybe another good candidate for that DAF consideration, I would guess.
Exactly. So now instead of working with a nonprofit organization, and they're really busy, of course, they're furthering their mission, they're focusing on their day-to-day tasks. Instead of diverting their attention to understanding and securing Bitcoin appropriately, which is very challenging, as many of us know who've been in Bitcoin for a while. They can focus on their mission, and then the donors themselves can secure the Bitcoin on behalf of that organization. So yeah, the DAF is like just a really nice way you can just earmark kind of Bitcoin for those different charities. Another thing that's really, I think, another anecdote of just the first few months of the Bitcoin DAFs. HRF recently announced that they received a 1 Bitcoin grant from a Bitcoin DAF donor. And they received the grant at about a 70K Bitcoin. Now Bitcoin's nearly 100K. So unless they immediately liquidated that Bitcoin, they now have significantly more purchasing power. And so, for the organizations that do accept Bitcoin, they love this because they can get the grants directly in Bitcoin. They don't have to lose the trading fees going to an exchange or working through the Unchained trading desk to buy Bitcoin when they receive dollars. They can just accept the Bitcoin directly. So more value continues to go to the nonprofit organizations. And then, according to, however the treasury is managed at these orgs, they can either hold it in Bitcoin, liquidate part of it, and so on. But, what we've seen historically, and you can never time the market, of course, is that holding Bitcoin for the long term really increases the ability to, do good in the world and your economic impact.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're always telling organizations, look, it's not about timing the market; it's just about being in the market, right? And Pietro, I don't want to hog the conversation here, but want to bring you in. Curious to get your thoughts, on everything that we're just talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, Phil, you make a bunch of really great points here. I think I want to pick your brain a little further on just how you see crypto being an innovative tool in the toolkit for frontline fundraisers for nonprofits. And I think, the Giving Block and Unchained, I think we sit at this interesting nexus of being maybe more the subject matter experts on crypto, bridging the gap between philanthropy and technology. But like you said, these folks are, attuned to following and growing their mission's impact. They're not necessarily trying to figure out all this stuff on their own. So how do you see folks like yourself bridging the gap? And also, like, something that you mentioned, which I think is really unbelievable in terms of a philanthropic use case, is like, grant you we always say, like, we're not going to say Bitcoin's going to go up forever and all the time and it's a guarantee. There's no modern alchemy, right? Like, however, some of what you're saying is like creating a much more enduring impact in terms of, okay, you grant out $1 million today and it's converted to cash. That is $1 million of impact. But if you like you said, drip out these grants over time, the net notional impact over the years may be 1.2 million or 1.5 million. You don't know. And obviously there comes, a question mark with doing that over time. But like, how do you see technology and crypto becoming just another point of like the innovation surface area for these folks? And how are you guys leaning into that?
Well, I think for a lot of early Bitcoiners, they're starting to come into really an amount of wealth that they have never experienced before, and so that's where they some of them feel maybe that they don't necessarily deserve it, or they want to now use that wealth to further the Bitcoin mission, and that's where I think nonprofit orgs can really benefit. I've worked with a few organizations and I've just helped them kind of put together really a pitch of like, hey, if you want donations or grants from Bitcoin holders, what you really need to do is clearly define how you're going to use the Bitcoin, right? So if you're going to just liquidate it for dollars, then you're much more likely to receive those dollar, drip grants over time. But if you have a really impactful use for Bitcoin, I think what you'll find is that you'll get Bitcoin grants, and then yes, you get to benefit from we'll call it the volatility of Bitcoin, but
Right.
but the potential to be able to fund things for much longer. So I mean, just in another example, I mentioned earlier that Base 58, that Bitcoin engineering school based here in Austin, received a small grant in Bitcoin. It was the world's first grant in Bitcoin, but since then the value has nearly tripled. So they were originally going to fund 5 engineers to go through their class. Now they have the purchasing power, assuming they haven't necessarily liquidated all the Bitcoin, to fund 10, 15 people to go through their class. And yeah, timing the market is always difficult, but this is the opportunity, I think.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
even seen with some of our nonprofit partners, like them leaning in even further and using crypto and Bitcoin in particular as a form factor to distribute aid in a way that otherwise wasn't possible with the fiat ecosystem. I think that's another thing that folks are probably going to start thinking through and maybe whiteboarding around their mission of like, I need to move, or transmit aid into a corridor where there aren't really good traditional banking rails and or maybe, regulatory or government, overreach insofar as like we've seen folks who are underbanked or debanked not being able to access, say, a US dollar wire, ACH, or something like that. And so Bitcoin is kind of like the lifeline there. And so if you could drip feed an organization, like you said, a grant in kind like that, seems extremely powerful. So I'm very, very eager to see this and like want to take a quick maybe trip down memory lane. We've never met actually, but I know you, Phil, from Twitter, and I've seen your work over the years. Very curious, like, what's your story? How did you end up on chain? And like, what is really exciting you and motivating you about this DAF mission? And what's exciting for you? Would love to hear the story.
Well, DApps are really easy for me to talk about because it's a very personal thing for me at this point. I'm actually, so this is December. What's today? December 4th or something like that. December marks my decade anniversary of being in Bitcoin. So I discovered Bitcoin in December of 2014 and just happened to be at the right place at the right time with the right background. I studied economics at the university, and I went into healthcare tech out of college. So I had technical chops a little bit, had the economics background, and was at the right place at the right time in 2014. Learned about Bitcoin, and things just sort of clicked for me. So that's when I fell very deeply down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I am unabashedly Bitcoin only with my pursuits. I believe Bitcoin is the kind of signal amidst the noise. But yeah, I have been in Bitcoin ever since. Pivoted my career to Bitcoin full time in 2017. Although from 2014 to 2017, I was writing about it, advocating it. It took up a lot of my brain space. And then joined Unchained in 2019. And yeah, I was employee number 11 at Unchained. We're now over 100 employees, and as I mentioned, have over $10 billion of Bitcoin secured on the platform. So
Wow.
yeah, this year for me personally, donor advised funds kind of came up as part of my financial plan, and I was like, learning about them, I was like, oh wow, we can do this here at Unchained and do it in a way that is Bitcoin native, which really resonates with me because I'm very much an advocate for controlling keys and just having as much control and transparency into where the Bitcoin is as possible. So I was able to use some tools at Unchained to form a connection with our DAF sponsor, which is University Impact Charitable Advisor. So on the Unchained platform, University Impact holds a key, Unchained holds a key, I personally hold a key, and then was able to donate Bitcoin directly on chain, see it in the DAF, and then have been able to drip out grants to both Bitcoin organizations as well as just traditional or other causes that I care about. So yeah, this year is my first year kind of getting into philanthropy personally, but it's been really cool to see how powerful a donor advised fund is. Another thing that I didn't even mention is once you have funds within a donor advised fund and you can donate, again, anything, altcoins, homes, stocks, dollars, Bitcoin. Once it's in there, you can invest the funds into a variety of different things. So not just Bitcoin, you can in fact invest in Bitcoin companies, or you can invest in MicroStrategy or whatever you'd really whatever you'd like. It's just that all of the gains from any of those investments must ultimately make it to a charity. So yeah, very personal journey for me this year, and it's something that I've really enjoyed learning about and starting to kind of share to the world.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. You mentioned the sort of uncovering like the DAF vehicle, because it's not something that I think a lot of people even have exposure to yet. I mean, obviously DAFs have exploded onto the scene, but like we say in Bitcoin, like we're still in early innings. I think on the DAF side as well. You had made a great sort of reference to like we all know about 401ks or HSAs. But DAFs, I think, are something that are still kind of trickling out there. And it's not something that I think every person is talking to with their financial advisor, though it's going to be really interesting, I think, especially over the next, prevailing years, where as we watch kind of the blending of the traditional finance space and the digital space, how considerations like this are probably going to come into more conversations, I would guess. Just kind of given everything in the market. And so especially with all the institutional players that have come into the space that now have a more compliant and regulated kind of setup, this sort of marries really well. And I expect all those big institutions will bring this additional education resources to a lot of donors. So for the donors out there, for the nonprofits out there, I think this is a trend we're going to continue to see accelerate. What's your take, Phil?
Couldn't agree more. I mean, donor advised funds are significantly more tax efficient than something like a private foundation. Now, there are additional rules for donor advised funds. Like you can't, I think with a private foundation, you can give, scholarship money to potentially like family members. And I'm not an expert in this area yet, so I'm still doing my diligence and learning. But with DAFs, you can't give grants to sort of anything that's directly beneficial to you as a donor. But you get the full like fair market value of your donation as a write-off that year. And so for people who, like I mentioned earlier, who are making large transactions, selling a business, selling a lot of crypto or Bitcoin, instead of paying those capital gains tax, donor advised funds are a way for you to really impact the world and then still get that tax write-off. And of course, you'd have to donate more crypto or Bitcoin or whatever than you would have to necessarily pay in capital gains. But I think the long-term benefits of DAFs are just so awesome that it makes it worth it. It's like you can give the government 15 to whatever 20%, or you can give 60% to charity.
Yep. Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, I don't know, Pietro, some closing thoughts on your side.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll ping this over to Phil because you're our guest today, and love to pick your brain and get your insights, because I think you're really seeing on the ground how some folks are thinking through. Like the way I look at this is like part of the capital cycle, right? In the sense of Bitcoin and the crypto ecosystem more broadly has benefited and is undergone, say, over the last decade, sort of the foundational building blocks of like building a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. And now I think we're getting to the point of maturity of like seeing some of that money trickle off towards nonprofits for good causes. And I think that's all part of like the cycle of building wealth and compounding wealth. And I think a lot of folks are, in this new cohort of untapped donors that have made it from crypto, but would love to see from your perspective or here, like if you have any projections, where do you think the future takes us? It could be any time frame, but curious to understand, like you're close to Bitcoiners, you're close to Bitcoin aligned nonprofits. Like where are the trends that we might keep an eye out for?
I think the election this year really shows us how far along Bitcoin and even broader crypto has come over the last decade. We pretty clearly made a major impact in the election cycle. You can kind of just see just from the polls that people who are Bitcoin or crypto aligned voted in a very specific way. And I think that proves kind of to the world, or at least to the U.S., that Bitcoin and crypto are here to stay, and these people are becoming more economically powerful. And so for a nonprofit organization, I think this is a really great time to get closer to your Bitcoin or crypto donors and understand them, understand what their needs are, what kind of drives them and motivates them. The Bitcoin DAFs, I think, are a really great option to potentially introduce them to if they're working with another donor advised fund, and you guys want to start accepting Bitcoin directly instead of dollars. These are a great option to just kind of talk to your best donors about.
Yeah. Well, I guess to start to tie a bow on this episode, Phil, help us understand if I'm a nonprofit or if I'm a donor, where am I going to learn more about you guys?
If you're a donor, unchained.com/DAF is a great place to start. We have a bunch of resources there. We have some great videos about the tax benefits, just introducing donor advised funds on our YouTube channel. And if you're a nonprofit organization and are interested in getting involved and potentially being featured in some co-marketing or something like that, you can reach out to me at phil@unchained.com and we'll work something out. I mean, we're really excited to, get introduced to more Bitcoin donors. And I think for a nonprofit organization, your best Bitcoin and crypto donors, and in particular, if they're already familiar with a DAF, are going to love a Bitcoin DAF because it is strictly better than the traditional version. You get to see the Bitcoin on chain, you get to deposit it directly, it's not liquidated, and then get to make those grants in either dollars or Bitcoin out to the organizations that you care about.
Fantastic. Well, we'll drop all the relevant links and notes in the show notes here. But Phil, it was great to have you on the show. Super informative. I'm sure this is going to be an episode that gets a lot of views. So thanks very much for joining us today.
Love it. Thanks so much, guys.
See you next time, everybody.